Imagine being trapped 35,000 feet above the ground, the doors sealed, the cabin pressurized, and your heart suddenly racing as if it might burst from your chest. There is no pause button, no escape route, no way to simply step outside for a breath of air. This is the terrifying reality of a panic attack in the sky. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more real stories from above the clouds. Your support keeps these human tales alive. The young woman sat by the window, her fingertips nervously tracing the condensation on the glass. She was 22, embarking on her first long-haul journey alone, a flight that would carry her far from home and into the unknown. The hum of the engines vibrated through the fuselage, a steady reminder of how far they were from the safety of the earth. Her breathing was steady for now, though each inhalation felt rehearsed, too deliberate, as if she were trying to prove to herself she was in control. The cabin around her buzzed with the sounds of boarding, overhead bins slamming shut, the polite voices of flight attendants guiding passengers, the rustle of seatbelts snapping into place. A man beside her flipped through a magazine, indifferent to her subtle restlessness. Families whispered excitedly, children pressed noses against the windows, and couples planned their arrival. To anyone else, it was just another flight. But to her, each click of a seatbelt echoed like a countdown to entrapment. She had battled anxiety before, in small doses, an exam, a crowded bus, the tension of saying goodbye. But never like this. Never in a space she couldn't control. She took a sip of water from her bottle, her hand trembling just enough that she quickly set it back down, hoping no one noticed. The plane pushed back from the gate, the rumble beneath her feet growing stronger. Her chest tightened. Already, the thought whispered in her mind, what if I can't do this? What if something happens to me up here? The safety demonstration blurred past her ears. She barely heard the instructions about oxygen masks or emergency exits. All she could think of was the fact that they were minutes away from leaving the ground. The walls of the cabin seemed closer than they had when she first boarded, the ceiling lower, the air denser. She inhaled deeply, silently counting to 4 as her therapist had once taught her, and exhaled slowly, praying it would be enough. When the engines roared to life for takeoff, she gripped the armrest so tightly her knuckles turned white. Outside, the runway light streaked into lines, and the aircraft surged forward, pressing her into the seat back. Her heart thudded wildly, every beat louder than the last. She forced herself to swallow, but her throat felt like it was closing. As the wheels lifted off the ground and the city lights fell away beneath them, the young woman's mind spiraled into a single, unrelenting thought, I'm trapped up here. And I can't escape. The seatbelt sign was still glowing overhead, a tiny amber reminder that no one could move, not yet. The engines hummed louder as the plane climbed into the night sky, slicing through thin layers of clouds. The young woman pressed her head back against the seat, her nails digging into her palms. Every vibration, every shift in sound felt amplified, as though the airplane itself was testing her endurance. Her heart pounded so hard she thought the people in the row behind might hear it. She tried to focus on the man beside her, who was now calmly adjusting his reading glasses. His serenity felt foreign, even mocking. How could anyone be so calm while hurtling into the unknown? She turned toward the oval window, but the darkness outside was suffocating, an endless black void that seemed to press inward rather than expand outward. Her breath hitched. Her chest felt heavy, each inhale shallow and incomplete. The first wave of panic rose quickly, like a tide surging over a seawall. Her vision tunneled slightly, blurring the outlines of the seat in front of her. She swallowed hard, forcing herself not to make a sound, not to draw attention. But inside her head, the alarm bells screamed, something is wrong. You can't breathe. You're going to faint. You're going to die. Her hands trembled as she fumbled for the call button above her seat. She pressed it once, twice, almost frantically, before pulling it back as if she had done something wrong. Within seconds, a flight attendant appeared in the aisle. Her expression was calm, professional, but her eyes softened when she saw the girl's pale face and trembling lips. "Are you okay?" the attendant whispered, crouching slightly so her voice didn't carry. The young woman shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. I can't breathe," she managed, though air was still flowing in and out of her lungs. The attendant knew the signs. This wasn't hypoxia or a medical emergency. It was fear, raw and consuming, the kind she had seen before. "You're safe," the attendant said gently. "You're breathing. I'm right here. Look at me." But the words barely touched the panic spiraling inside the young woman. Her body didn't believe safety was possible, not 30,000 feet above the ground. She clawed at the seatbelt across her lap, desperate to escape the invisible trap closing around her. The man beside her finally looked up, startled, unsure whether to intervene. The attendant leaned closer, her tone soothing but firm. "Stay with me. Focus on my voice. Put your hand here." She guided the passenger's trembling palm to her own steady wrist, letting her feel the slow, even beat of her pulse. "Match me. Inhale with me. Now exhale." The girl tried. Her breaths came ragged, uneven, but for a brief moment, she latched onto the rhythm. Then a pocket of turbulence jolted the aircraft, and her fragile calm shattered. She gasped, her body stiffening, convinced the sudden drop meant disaster. Around her, other passengers stirred, some curious, others annoyed by the commotion. A child across the aisle peeked over the seat, wide-eyed. The attendant glanced toward the front of the cabin, signaling discreetly to another crew member for backup. Soon, a second attendant approached, carrying a bottle of water and a reassuring smile. Together, they created a cocoon of calm around a panicking passenger, shielding her from the stares. The girl's chest heaved. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for an exit that didn't exist. The reality pressed down on her. There was nowhere to go, no way out. The walls of the fuselage might as well have been prison bars. Tears spilled down her cheeks, unbidden and uncontrollable. The second attendant crouched beside her, offering the bottle. "Take a sip," she encouraged softly. "Small sips. You're doing okay." The young woman obeyed, her trembling fingers barely steady enough to hold the plastic. The water cooled her throat but did nothing to calm the storm inside. Memories surged, memories she hadn't expected to carry into the sky. The hospital waiting room years ago, when her father's heart monitor beeped frantically. The crowded subway where she once felt trapped between bodies pressing from all sides. The nights she lay awake, convinced her heart would stop before morning. Now, all of those fears converged in one unbearable moment, condensed into a claustrophobic capsule soaring higher and higher. The captain's voice crackled overhead, announcing their cruising altitude. To most, it was reassurance, a sign of progress. To her, it was confirmation that they were further from safety than ever. Her pulse raced. Her palms sweated. She turned to the attendant again, whispering through sobs, "Please. I can't do this. I can't." But the attendant met her desperation with steadiness. "You already are doing it," she replied. "And you're not alone. I promise you, this plane is safe. You are safe." The girl wanted to believe her. She wanted to anchor herself to the calm faces around her, to the crew who moved with such practiced confidence. But her mind was a runaway train, barreling past logic, blind to comfort. Every second felt like a lifetime. Every sound, the hum of engines, the ding of a seatbelt sign, was twisted into a signal of impending doom. Still, beneath the chaos, a faint thread of connection began to form. The attendant's steady breathing exercises, the gentle squeeze of her shoulder, the repeated reassurances, tiny lifelines in the storm. She clung to them desperately, unsure whether they would hold. Far from the ground, wrapped in fear and surrounded by strangers, she had never felt smaller. And yet, in that fragile space between terror and survival, something was beginning to shift. The cabin lights dimmed to a softer glow as the plane leveled into cruise, but for the young woman, the world was still spinning out of control. She clutched the armrests with white knuckles, her breathing shallow, uneven, as though the very act of pulling air into her lungs was impossible at this altitude. The second flight attendant remained by her side, whispering calm reassurances, while the first stood just behind, keeping watch over the rest of the cabin. Passengers nearby had begun to notice. A middle-aged woman 2 rows ahead turned her head slightly, her expression caught between curiosity and concern. A businessman across the aisle gave a subtle sigh, clearly inconvenienced by the disruption. Others pretended not to notice, burying their eyes in books or screens, but the air in that section of the cabin had changed. Anxiety, once contained within a single passenger, had begun to ripple outward, unsettling those who were suddenly reminded of their own vulnerability. The young woman wiped her cheeks with trembling hands, embarrassed by her loss of control, yet powerless to stop it. "I'm sorry," she whispered through ragged breaths. "I don't want to bother anyone." The attendant crouched lower, making her voice intimate, just between them. "You're not bothering anyone. This happens more often than you think. You're not alone, and we're trained for this." The words floated like lifelines, but her panic still surged, insistent and wild. She imagined the walls of the plane closing in, the pressurized cabin suffocating her. Her mind conjured images of doors bursting open, of being pulled into the endless void outside. She shook her head violently, as if she could dispel the visions through sheer will. From the cockpit, the captain had been informed via interphone. He glanced at his co-pilot, who gave a short nod. Yes, a passenger panic attack, not a medical emergency. Still, the captain knew fear could spread like wildfire in a confined space. His voice over the PA was steady, deliberate, carefully chosen. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to reassure you that everything is running smoothly. We're cruising comfortably and expect a safe, on-time arrival. Please sit back and relax." For many passengers, the announcement was routine. For her, it was almost unbearable. Relax? Her body was in revolt, her heart pounding erratically, sweat dampening her hairline. The reassurance didn't touch her reality. The man seated beside her finally spoke, his voice tentative. Do you want me to switch seats with someone? Give you a little space?" She shook her head, ashamed. "No, it's not you. It's me." Her voice cracked. He nodded, sympathetic, and quietly shifted his posture, trying to give her more room without drawing further attention. The attendants kept working with her, guiding her through breathing exercises, grounding techniques. One asked her to name 5 things she could see around her, 4 she could feel, 3 she could hear. At first, she could barely focus enough to respond. But slowly, shakily, she whispered, "The tray table, your scarf, the seatbelt sign." Her voice was fragile, but each word tethered her, however briefly, to something outside of her fear. Then turbulence returned, a gentle but unmistakable roll that made cups rattle in the galley. The young woman stiffened instantly, her nails digging into her palms. Her breath hitched again, and she gasped, convinced the plane was about to fall from the sky. Her terror flared so visibly that another passenger called out, "Is she okay?" The first attendant turned smoothly, her professional smile unwavering. "She's in good hands, thank you." But the moment revealed the delicate balance of the cabin. Fear, if left unchecked, could spread. The crew knew they had to contain it. The young woman's sobs grew harsher, her chest heaving as she whispered again and again, "I can't do this, I can't do this, the second attendant gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You are doing it," she said firmly. "Every second that passes, you're proving yourself stronger than you think." The words pierced through, not completely, but enough. The girl's sobs softened into hiccuping breaths. She looked into the attendant's eyes, desperate for something, anything, to hold on to. In the back of the plane, a little boy tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom, why is that lady crying?" His voice carried just enough to be heard. The mother bent close, whispering something reassuring, but the girl caught the words and felt the heat of shame rise in her chest. She was now the spectacle, the story others would tell after they landed. The humiliation only fed her panic. One of the attendants glanced at the galley and signaled. Within moments, another crew member brought a small oxygen canister, not strictly necessary, but sometimes the flow of cool air helped calm passengers who felt they couldn't breathe. They placed the mask gently in her hands. "Here," the attendant said softly. "This is just oxygen. It's safe. Take a few breaths." She hesitated, terrified it might signal something worse, but desperation outweighed doubt. She placed it over her nose and mouth, inhaling shakily. The cool rush felt different, almost grounding. For the first time in what felt like forever, her lungs expanded without as much resistance. Her tears continued, but something inside began to shift. The peak of her panic had passed. She was still trembling, still vulnerable, but a faint thread of control was returning. She clung to it desperately, knowing the storm could flare again at any moment. Around her, the attendants remained calm, their movements practiced and confident. The other passengers, sensing the situation was under control, gradually returned to their own distractions. The businessman reopened his laptop. The child across the aisle lost interest and turned back to his coloring book. But for the young woman, time remained suspended. She was still in the sky, still trapped in a metal cylinder with no escape, her worst fear alive and pressing against her chest. And yet, she was not alone. The voices around her, steady, patient, kind, kept her tethered. The flight was far from over, and she knew the panic might surge again. But in this fragile moment, between breath and breath, she discovered that survival wasn't about being fearless. It was about enduring the storm, minute by minute, with the help of those who refused to let her drown. Minutes passed, though for her it felt like hours suspended in the thin air. The oxygen mask helped, not as a miracle cure, but as a bridge across the most turbulent moments. The attendants rotated discreetly, one crouched at her side, the others moving through the cabin with quiet efficiency, checking seatbelts, refilling drinks, pretending that nothing unusual was happening just a few rows away. That normalcy itself became part of the medicine. If they could keep working, then perhaps the world wasn't ending after all. The young woman's chest still rose and fell with uneven rhythm, but the frantic edge had dulled. She leaned her forehead against the seat in front of her, her tears soaking into the soft fabric of the headrest. She could hear the thrum of the engines, steady, constant, indifferent to her panic. Each vibration reminded her that this plane was carrying not just her terror, but hundreds of lives, and that every passenger had placed their trust in those unseen pilots at the controls. The thought terrified her, but it also steadied her. She was not the only one here. Her seatmate, silent for so long, finally offered a small gesture. He slid a bottle of water from his bag and placed it gently on her tray. No words, just a kindness. She glanced sideways, her eyes swollen, and managed a weak "thank you." He nodded, his expression warm, and returned to staring at the window. That small exchange felt monumental, proof that she hadn't completely collapsed into isolation. Still, panic is rarely a single wave. It ebbs, then surges again, often without warning. A sudden jolt of turbulence rattled the overhead bins, and instantly her grip on calm began to slip. She gasped, eyes wide, convinced the plane was falling. Her heart hammered violently as if trying to escape her chest. The attendant pressed a hand gently against her arm. "Look at me," she said firmly. "You're safe. This is just air. The plane is strong. You are safe." But her mind screamed otherwise. In the swirl of fear, she imagined the engines flaming out, the wings tearing away, the cabin plunging. Her body responded as though these visions were real, her muscles rigid, her stomach knotted, sweat running cold along her back. The logic of safety announcements, of statistics about flying, meant nothing in the grip of primal terror. The crew knew they had to anchor her again. One attendant crouched lower, lowering her voice as though sharing a secret. "Do you have someone waiting for you when you land? Someone you'll see tonight?" The question startled her, cutting through the panic. Her lips quivered, then finally, she whispered, "My sister." The attendant smiled softly. "Then focus on her. Picture her face. Picture the moment you walk into her arms. That's where this flight ends, not here, not in this fear." Her imagination, so used to conjuring disaster, now shifted. She saw her sister's smile, heard her laugh, remembered their last hug before the trip. It wasn't enough to banish the fear, but it gave her something brighter to cling to. Tears returned, but they were softer now, less frantic. The cabin gradually settled. Conversations resumed, trays clicked open, the faint aroma of coffee drifted down the aisle. Outside the windows, daylight began to shift, the horizon glowing with the first hues of late afternoon. For most passengers, it was an ordinary flight. For her, it was a battlefield, and every moment she endured felt like a victory stolen from the jaws of collapse. Hours later, the captain's voice returned, calm and assured. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent. Weather in our destination is clear, and we'll be on the ground shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts." The announcement triggered a fresh tremor of fear. Descent meant change, altitude shifting, engines roaring louder, the subtle tilt of the cabin as the plane angled downward. Her panic lurked, waiting. She closed her eyes tightly, whispering to herself, "Almost there, almost there." The oxygen mask had been removed earlier, but the memory of its cool air stayed with her. She focused on her breathing, mimicking the rhythm the attendants had taught her. The seatbelt sign dinged, and attendants secured the cabin. Yet even as they moved briskly, one stayed close, giving her an encouraging nod. It wasn't just duty anymore, it was humanity. As the plane descended through layers of cloud, the fuselage trembled slightly, producing that hollow thud familiar to frequent flyers but terrifying to her ears. Her heart rate spiked again, sweat beading across her temples. I can't," she whispered under her breath. Her seatmate leaned closer, voice quiet but steady. "You're doing it. You've been doing it this whole time. Just a little longer." For the first time since her panic began, she met his eyes directly. There was no judgment there, no pity, only simple solidarity. It was enough. She clutched the armrests, dug her heels into the floor, and forced herself to breathe in sync with the engine's drone. One breath, then another. The city below began to emerge through the windows, tiny cars on highways, rooftops glowing in the sun. The sight was surreal, proof that the earth was still there, waiting. Her fear still raged, but so did her determination. The wheels touched down with a jarring thud, the roar of reverse thrust filling the cabin. She gasped sharply, bracing for disaster, but nothing came. The plane slowed, steady and controlled, as if mocking the catastrophes her mind had painted. The reality was ordinary, another safe landing. As the aircraft taxied, passengers unclipped seatbelts, gathered bags, and prepared for the shuffle to the exit. She sat frozen, tears spilling silently, her body shaking with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. She had survived, not just the flight, but the storm inside her own mind. The attendant touched her arm once more. "You did it," she whispered. "You're stronger than you know." The words landed like a final anchor. She managed a faint smile, weak but real. And as the door opened and sunlight poured into the cabin, she stood on unsteady legs, carrying with her the memory of a battle fought at 30,000 feet, a battle no one else could see, but one that mattered more than any turbulence the sky could offer. The cabin doors opened with a hiss, releasing a rush of air that smelled of fuel, asphalt, and something deeply comforting, earth. For hours she had felt trapped between sky and void, weightless in her own panic, and now, finally, gravity felt like salvation. The young woman clutched her small bag and followed the stream of passengers toward the exit. Her legs trembled with every step, not from turbulence this time, but from the exhaustion of everything she had endured. The jet bridge was narrow and bright, a stark contrast to the dim cabin. She paused halfway through, pressing her palm against the cool metal wall. A flood of emotions crashed over her, relief, shame, gratitude, disbelief. Tears welled again, but these were different, lighter, almost cleansing. When she reached the terminal, the familiar chaos of an airport greeted her, rolling suitcases, voices calling out, families reuniting. It should have been overwhelming, but compared to the storm inside her mind at 30,000 feet, it felt manageable, almost grounding. And then she saw her. Her sister stood beyond the barrier, waving, her smile wide and real. In an instant, the world shrank to just that face. The young woman dropped her bag, rushed forward, and collapsed into her sister's arms. For a moment, she didn't speak, she simply held on, sobbing softly, feeling the warmth and solidity of someone who had always been her anchor. "You're okay," her sister whispered into her hair. "You made it." The words echoed what the flight attendant had said, what her seatmate's eyes had conveyed, what she had struggled to believe in the darkest moments of her panic. She had made it. Later, sitting with a cup of tea in the terminal cafe, her hand still shaking slightly, she tried to put the experience into words. It wasn't just fear of flying. It was the terror of losing control, of being trapped with nowhere to run, of her own body turning against her. Yet within that nightmare, she had discovered unexpected kindness, an attendant's gentle steadiness, a stranger's quiet support, her own hidden reservoir of strength. For the first time, she realized that panic didn't mean weakness. It meant she had faced something overwhelming and survived it anyway. The sky hadn't broken her. As night fell outside the wide glass windows, planes continued to rise and descend in arcs of light, each carrying souls with their own battles, hopes, and fears. She watched them, her chest still heavy but no longer suffocating. Flying would never be easy for her, but it would no longer be unthinkable. Her journey had not been about conquering the sky, it had been about discovering herself within it. And for everyone who has ever felt the grip of fear, whether in an airplane cabin or in the quiet of their own mind, her story carried a message: you are not alone, your panic is not the end, and strength can be found even at 30,000 feet. So the next time the engines roared and the cabin lights dimmed, she knew she might tremble, she might cry, but she would also remember the ground waiting beneath her, the people who cared for her, and the unshakable truth that even fear cannot stop a heart determined to keep flying.